Just a short while ago, Victoria Hayes's life had gleamed like a polished diamond. Known throughout the city as a formidable entrepreneur, a beloved wife, and simply a strikingly beautiful woman, Victoria felt a quiet pride hum beneath her skin. She had every right to. She had begun her journey from absolutely nothing, starting as a rather clumsy ordinary hairdresser in a small struggling beauty salon, a place that had hired her purely out of desperation and only on a trial basis. But now she was the proud owner of an entire chain of the most prestigious high-end salons, their names synonymous with luxury and impeccable style. Still, her heart held a special, almost nostalgic affection for that very first salon, the humble genesis of her dazzling success. Lately, however, a subtle, disquieting whisper had begun in her body, a vague sense of unease. Her relentless schedule, a whirlwind of meetings, calls and creative visions, wouldn't allow for immediate attention to her health. But when the unsettling sensations persisted, refusing to be ignored, she finally relented, pushing through her packed calendar to schedule a comprehensive medical checkup. The news, when it finally came, was a crushing blow. The problem was far more serious than she'd imagined. Her illness, it turned out, had advanced significantly, an unwelcome, insidious intruder. Yet the doctors, with practiced smiles and reassuring tones, offered cautiously optimistic prognoses. The key, they stressed, was immediate and unwavering focus on her well-being, diligent treatment, unwavering adherence to their recommendations, and above all, rest. Victoria, a woman who had clawed her way to the top with sheer grit and relentless ambition, wasn't about to surrender her glittering life so easily. She was prepared to fight, armed with the fierce determination that had built her empire. Moreover, she had a secret weapon, a fortress she believed she could rely on. Her husband, Michael. When Michael learned of her diagnosis, he didn't recoil in fear or despair. Quite the opposite. He seemed to mobilize every ounce of his protective instinct, his devotion blossoming in the face of adversity. He became her unwavering advocate, gently but firmly urging her to prioritize her recovery above all else. "First, you simply must stop working day and night," he'd insist, his voice firm yet tender. "You spend all your waking hours fretting over your salons, your clients, glued to your phone, taking calls at all hours. And after all that, you expect to heal? No, my love, that simply won't do. You need more rest, more peace." To Victoria, a driven businesswoman who had sculpted her very identity around her work, acquiescing to this felt like severing a limb. "I agree, Michael, darling, but how?" she'd counter, a tremor of anxiety in her voice. "I can't just abandon everything, not even for a minute. Even with my reliable staff, someone needs to oversee everything." Michael would then pound his chest lightly, a gesture of unwavering support. "Vicky, you're not a lone wolf anymore. You have a husband. You have me. You can lean on me completely. We haven't been together for just a few months, you know. We've built a life. I might not be as brilliant at this as you are, but I understand business. I'll give you a full report every single day, so you'll always have your finger on the pulse, even from afar." And so, Victoria, her body growing weary from the constant battle, reluctantly agreed. The endless rounds of doctor's appointments, the exhaustive tests, the intrusive procedures, it all consumed her days, draining her energy like a slow leak. Gradually, inexorably, the reins of her entire business empire slipped into Michael's capable hands, and, to her surprise, he seemed to be managing quite well, his innate intelligence proving more adaptable than she'd initially given him credit for. Yet, Even with this newfound control, Michael still believed Victoria wasn't caring for herself enough, not truly prioritising her recovery. "All right, my sweet Vicky," he announced one evening, his eyes alight with what seemed like genuine excitement. "I bought us a charming little house in the countryside. I think you should move there." "Move? To the countryside? What do you mean?" Victoria asked, a sudden chill creeping through her, her voice thin with apprehension. "And I'll be all alone out there?" "Why alone? It's not 1,000 miles away. It's just a short drive from the city," Michael reassured her, his tone soothing, like oil poured over troubled waters. "And the area isn't remote at all. The house itself, well, it's no palace, of course, but it's a dollhouse, truly. All the conveniences, a full bathroom, running water, no worse than what we have in the city." "But why do I need to move out of the city?" Victoria pressed, her confusion deepening, a knot forming in her stomach. "What's the necessity?" "You should really do some reading online, my dear. Fresh air, communion with nature. It's the best medicine," he suggested, a hint of patronising patience in his voice. "Perhaps, of course, but what about my treatments? I'll be so far from my doctors and the pharmacy." She continued to voice her doubts, a nagging whisper of unease. "Vicky, my darling," Michael said, taking her hands in his gaze earnest. "Do you truly believe I haven't thought through every single detail before deciding to move you to the countryside? There's a reliable doctor living right nearby who will oversee your health and ensure you have everything you need. Besides, I'll soon find you a housekeeper, someone to help you with all the daily chores. I'll visit as often as I possibly can, of course, but the business, as you know, demands a significant amount of my time. Still, I'll be there every moment I can spare," he passionately assured her, his words a persuasive balm. "But honestly, don't you yourself long to live in fresh air, in complete tranquility, away from the endless stresses that have already harmed you so much?" Victoria paused, considering his words. Perhaps, she conceded, the idea wasn't so terrible after all. She truly hadn't been feeling well, her body a constant ache, and perhaps in a new serene environment, everything might indeed change for the better. The house her husband drove her to proved to be surprisingly well appointed and perfectly suitable for comfortable living. The place, however, was undeniably isolated, a quiet pocket tucked away from the bustling world, its silence almost palpable. The few neighbours, mostly elderly women with eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken stories, offered no inclination for social niceties. Their glances were fleeting, their expressions unreadable, as if Victoria were simply a fleeting shadow on their quiet lane. "Perfect," Michael exclaimed, his voice bubbling with forced enthusiasm, oblivious to Victoria's yearning for even a simple nod. "The less you interact with outsiders, the better. Imagine they'd flock to you with their endless problems, their dreary complaints, their shallow sympathies. No, I can't even stomach the thought. This way, you'll live in absolute tranquility. You'll see, everything will fall into place, just like a well-tended garden." "But where is the doctor you promised?" Victoria asked, a sliver of doubt, sharp as a tiny splinter, pricking at her mind. "He'll arrive, don't fret. I'll introduce you myself," Michael reassured her, his tone smooth as polished wood. "Oh, and by the way, the internet connection here is practically non-existent, and cell service is spotty at best." Victoria's jaw dropped, a wave of helplessness washing over her. "What? How will I manage here?" The thought of being cut off adrift from her bustling city life, was almost paralysing. Michael chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. "How did people live before it, Vicky? Give it a try. You might find yourself drawn to the quiet. Once you're well, back in the city, you might not even want to dive back into all that digital noise." The doctor arrived later that same day. He was a surprisingly amiable and cheerful young man, his demeanour more akin to a bohemian artist than a medical professional. His eyes, though friendly, held a peculiar glint, and his questions felt oddly superficial, lacking the sharp, probing insight she had grown accustomed to from her specialists. He carried none of the gravitas or professional solemnity she associated with her recent medical consultations. "Well, people are different, I suppose," Victoria mused, attempting to quell the persistent flicker of unease. Besides, this Dr. Thorne, as he introduced himself, with a disarmingly casual smile, promised to visit her daily, diligently monitor her health, and prescribe all necessary medications. "The most important things for you right now are peace, fresh air, and nourishing food," he declared, his voice light and airy. "I trust I don't need to lecture you on that, do I? You know it all perfectly well yourself." Michael left that evening, a picture of a man utterly at peace, utterly content with his cunning handiwork. His elaborate plan to move Victoria to the countryside was, indeed, entirely devoid of genuine care for her well-being. He had for months quietly plotted to seize control of her thriving business empire, and with it her substantial fortune. Learning of Victoria's illness had simply accelerated his timeline, serving as a dark catalyst. Her prognosis, though potentially manageable, was indeed serious. The city doctors had strongly recommended a complex surgery, and Michael had deftly, almost imperceptibly, steered Victoria away from that dangerous path, his persuasion a silken rope around her neck. He had played the role of the devoted, worried husband to perfection. A masterful performance. Victoria, softened by illness and vulnerability, had agreed to the move with barely a whisper of dissent. This meant she wouldn't constantly interfere with his management, wouldn't scrutinise the financial ledgers that were now entirely in his grasp. Now, he mused, leaning back in his plush car seat, the only remaining task was to minimise her contact with her former staff. "I won't pay the phone bill. The internet will remain disconnected. Simple as that." And Dr. Thorne would surely reinforce the idea that external worries were a dangerous toxin to her delicate health. He was no doctor at all, of course. He was Nicholas Thorne, an old acquaintance of Michael's, a struggling actor who, for a modest sum, had enthusiastically embraced this peculiar role. The thought of Victoria's health steadily deteriorating due to lack of proper medical care, a slow erosion of her vitality, didn't register as a significant misfortune in Michael's cold, calculating mind. How much longer did she truly have anyway? He mused, a cynical curl to his lips. A shame, perhaps, but what can one do? If I'm being brutally honest, perhaps this is even better for her. She'll pass away without prolonged suffering, and the sooner, the better for everyone. And for him, the benefits were undeniably tangible. The entire business, every gleaming salon, every cent of her hard-earned money would be his. It was infinitely preferable to a wife who might become a permanent invalid, a burdensome shadow. Besides, he already had a replacement, a more vibrant, untainted future awaiting him. He smiled, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he recalled his relatively new mistress, Olivia. Young, strikingly beautiful, and deliciously carefree. Lately, though, Olivia had begun dropping increasingly heavy hints, like stones skipping across a quiet pond, about solidifying her position, about becoming his lawful wife in due course. Michael, however, was in no rush. First, he was still officially married. Second, Olivia, while delightful, wasn't necessarily his first choice. Who knows? Once I'm truly wealthy and utterly free, someone even more interesting might appear, the villain mused, his mind a labyrinth of self-serving schemes, hatching a plot to rid himself of his wife in such an exquisitely cruel and subtle manner. One crucial detail remained, however. He needed to hire someone for the dual role of a medical orderly and a general handyman, someone who could manage the household duties and, crucially, keep Victoria entirely isolated. Initially, Michael had considered finding a reliable woman for the job, but he quickly discarded the idea. No, women are too prone to befriending each other, to gossiping about things that shouldn't be discussed. He needed a man, preferably one with a questionable past, someone who, if necessary, could be coerced into performing more serious tasks. What those tasks might entail, he hadn't yet fully articulated, preferring to believe that things would simply happen, sparing his soul any further direct stain. And so, into their manufactured rural life came Gabe, a man recently released from a correctional facility, his past as murky and uninviting as a stagnant pond. Soon after, Michael drove Gabe to the isolated house for an introduction. "Vicky, my love," Michael gushed, his voice dripping with faux earnestness. "This is Gabe, a truly dependable and good man. He worked as an orderly in a hospital, so he'll handle anything you ask." Michael's words flowed like honey, sweet and deceptively smooth. Victoria simply waved her hand, a gesture of weary resignation. What did it matter any more? From the insidious creeping feeling in her bones, it seemed any care, no matter how devoted, would soon be irrelevant. So let him live here, this man Michael had chosen. At the very least, he wouldn't actively harm her. Victoria, shrouded in her illness, perceived him merely as an orderly, a caretaker. Michael, in his cynical calculations, saw him as an ex-convict, a man who had served time for a serious offence, and thus, devoid of moral principles, a pliable tool for his dark designs. But, in truth, Gabe had no connection to medicine whatsoever, and his time behind bars had been utterly unearned. He had simply shouldered another man's crime, a heavy burden carried out of selfless love. He'd been a meticulous taxi driver, navigating the city streets with careful precision, his record spotless. He understood, with the sharp clarity of youthful ambition, that his primary focus needed to be earning money, not courting trouble. At the time, his mother, a woman with eyes that held the gentle wisdom of years, had fallen gravely ill, and the urgent need for treatment funds had become a relentless drumbeat in his life. Meanwhile, the privileged son of a powerful, wealthy man had no such worries about money. His world revolved solely around fleeting pleasures, a reckless pursuit that had culminated in tragedy. He had struck and killed a young woman on a crosswalk. The affluent parents of the pampered youth, desperate to shield their son from the consequences of his reckless act, had found Gabe. They'd approached him with an offer cloaked in false generosity, pleading with him to claim responsibility for the crime. "Don't worry," they'd promised, their voices dripping with false assurances. "You'll have an excellent lawyer, the best money can buy. Of course, you'll have to spend some time in a correctional facility, but in return, your mother will receive the finest medical care available. When you return, she'll be waiting for you, alive and well." Gabe, his heart aching with filial devotion, had been willing to do anything for his mother, even sacrifice his freedom for a time. He hadn't known then, couldn't have known, that his mother's illness was terminal, a relentless tide that would claim her regardless, and the shattering news of her son's fate, delivered through the cold walls of a prison, would only hasten her final decline. 4 years later, Gabe was released on parole, emerging from the shadowed gates with empty pockets and a hollow ache in his soul. Even worse, while incarcerated, there had been chilling attempts on his life, whispers of accidents, a crude effort to silence him permanently, to avoid paying the promised compensation for his sacrifice. Thus, he emerged into the stark light of freedom with nothing but the clothes on his back and the bitter taste of betrayal. His mother was gone, taken by the very illness he'd tried to fight. Money and work were elusive as shadows. Even his home, this very house, was no longer his. Indeed, the quaint, charming house where Michael had sequestered Victoria had once belonged to Gabe and his mother. After the gentle old woman passed away, the property had been sold at auction for a pittance, a mere fraction of its worth, swept away in the callous tide of legal proceedings. Gabe, of course, had no intention of revealing this poignant truth, not to his cunning employer, nor to the ailing woman he was now tasked with caring for. He simply seized the opportunity to inhabit, for however brief a time, the place where his happiest years had unfolded, where echoes of his mother's laughter still seemed to linger in the sunlit rooms. So he meticulously, and quite successfully, feigned complete unfamiliarity with the house and its surroundings. Toward Victoria, Gabe felt a profound, genuine sympathy. He saw, with a clarity that stung, that she was truly ill, her vitality ebbing with each passing day, and she seemed to worsen day by agonizing day despite the regular visits from Dr. Thorne. Was he even a real doctor? A flicker of suspicion ignited in Gabe's mind one afternoon. He overheard Victoria, her voice a fragile sigh, confiding in Nicholas. "These pills aren't helping, Dr. Thorne. I think they're actually making me feel worse." "It's merely your imagination, dear lady," Nicholas had responded, his tone dismissive, yet breezily cheerful. "The illness is retreating, but it's a stubborn beast, unwilling to surrender easily. That's why you imagine feeling worse. Drink not 1, but 3 of these doses. The process will quicken." The doctor's glib reply only solidified Gabe's burgeoning suspicion, confirming a cold dread. "I have serious doubts about Dr. Thorne's competence," Gabe stated bluntly to Victoria after Nicholas's departure, his voice low and firm. "Let me see his prescriptions. I'll drive into the city, speak with some real doctors." And so he did, his determination a quiet fire. He quickly discovered that Nicholas Thorne had absolutely no medical credentials. More than that, Gabe managed to arrange for a genuine, reputable physician to begin visiting Victoria, discreetly disguised as part of a new community outreach nursing service. For Victoria, Gabe became her silent, watchful guardian, a crucial link to the outside world, a steady anchor in her terrifying isolation. Michael, observing this from afar, seethed with growing dissatisfaction. He had anticipated a very different outcome. In his twisted vision, Gabe was meant to be a compliant pawn, a shadow in the background. But instead, Gabe seemed to misunderstand the very purpose for which he was being paid. "Perhaps I'm not offering him enough," Michael mused, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Meanwhile, Gabe grew less and less careful about concealing his intimate knowledge of every nook and cranny of the old house. Victoria, observant even in her weakened state, noticed. "Forgive me, Gabe," she said one afternoon, her gaze steady, "but it seems to me you're not a stranger here. Are you hiding something from me?" "Yes, I was," Gabe admitted, his voice quiet, almost regretful. "But I won't any more." And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I lived here once. Since birth, this was my home." He then unspooled his entire sorrowful story, a tale of injustice, loss and betrayal. Victoria was profoundly moved, tears gathering in her eyes as he spoke. The narrative settled within her, a clear, undeniable truth. And she understood with a chilling certainty that the true deceiver in her life was not this kind, burdened helper, but her own husband. "You know, Gabe," she said, her voice resolute, a new-found strength hardening her resolve, "I've decided I'm going to write a will, and this entire house, every brick and beam, I'm leaving to you. When I'm gone, you'll be able to live as you did before." "Stop talking about yourself in the past tense," Gabe exclaimed, a sudden surge of passion in his voice, his eyes bright with a conviction that ignited a spark of hope in Victoria. "I believe you will recover. Victoria, I truly do." Yet Victoria, in the quiet moments, had already resigned herself to her fate, accepting that she would soon depart this world. "But Gabe," she reasoned, her voice fragile, "you can't possibly care for me forever. This way, you'll be free, truly free. You can live peacefully, perhaps even find a partner, build a family of your own." "No, Victoria, even after your recovery, I have no intention of living any other way than to see this through," Gabe assured her, his voice firm, unwavering as an ancient oak. "When you no longer need me, I'll go. And don't worry, I'll find work and a place to live. After all," he gestured vaguely towards the surrounding landscape, "there are plenty of abandoned houses out here." He genuinely believed in her recovery, a belief that shone like a steady flame in the growing darkness. Meanwhile, Michael, in his distant city office, grew increasingly agitated. Victoria, it seemed, was taking an agonizingly long time to depart this world. His wife was inconveniently clinging to life. He decided to hasten the process, a grim resolve settling in his heart, and contacted Gabe. "I trust you understand, Gabe, that my wife is not long for this world," Michael stated, his voice devoid of emotion, hard as granite. "We need to help her pass on without further suffering." His words were a chilling command, thinly veiled as an act of mercy. "What are you talking about?" Gabe asked, feigning surprise, though a cold dread had already begun to coil in his stomach. "Oh, do I really need to spell it out for you?" Michael replied, his irritation sharp like a sudden crack of thunder. "I'm not suggesting you suffocate her. There's a much simpler way. When she's taking her bath, just give her a little push. Make sure she can't get out right away. There will be no questions, no suspicion pointed at you." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper laced with insidious temptation. "A sick woman loses consciousness and drowns. It happens all the time. Are you out of your mind? Gabe countered, a genuine tremor of revulsion in his voice, his mind reeling. She's your wife. Yes, Michael retorted, his voice cold and flat. And I don't want her to suffer any more. And you, Gabe, stand to gain directly from this. You'll get money, a substantial sum, and I'll sign the house over to you. And if questions somehow arise, I'll hire the best lawyer in the state. You'll be cleared, an innocent man. Gabe hesitated, a battle raging within him. He thought of his mother, the injustice, the empty promises. He thought of Victoria, so vulnerable, so trusting. He made a decision. He nodded slowly, a subtle, almost imperceptible agreement. But of course, he had absolutely no intention of harming Victoria. He played along, his face a mask of complicity. After agreeing to everything with Michael, Gabe immediately went to Victoria's room and, in hushed, urgent tones, revealed her husband's monstrous plan, every chilling detail laid bare. Let's stage it, Gabe proposed, his eyes gleaming with a daring, desperate hope. We'll make it look as if I've carried out his grim instructions. And so, shortly after, Gabe called his nefarious employer, his voice carefully modulated to sound grim and efficient, reporting that the deed was done. In reality, he and Victoria had simply orchestrated a chilling tableau. When Michael arrived, his eyes gleaming with anticipated freedom, he found his wife lying motionless in the bathroom, covered by a white sheet, a ghastly picture of quiet tragedy. It went exactly as you said, sir, Gabe reported, his voice low, a masterful performance of detached efficiency. She drowned. I pulled her out. A clean exit. Good. When should I call the coroner's service? Michael asked, a flicker of cold satisfaction in his eyes. Right now, Gabe replied, then added with a calculated pause. No, even better, call after I leave so I'm not here. You've done well, Gabe. Our arrangements stand firm. Michael didn't even notice the small, discreet voice recorder lying innocently beside Victoria's still form, silently capturing every damning word of their conversation. Once I've sorted out the funeral arrangements, I'll settle up with you, Michael promised, his voice almost light with relief, and I'll sign over the house. This rural backwater is no use to me anyway. As soon as Michael's car, a sleek, dark blur, disappeared down the winding country lane, Gabe didn't call the coroner. Instead, he dialed the police, his fingers steady, his voice clear as a bell. He and Victoria then provided their detailed testimonies, unravelling the entire heinous plot her husband had concocted. They signed their official statements, and within hours, Michael was apprehended. Stunned by such a profound betrayal, he didn't even put up much of a fight, his arrogance shattering under the weight of the undeniable evidence. He confessed candidly to all his crimes, his twisted schemes finally brought to light. Victoria, now imbued with a renewed sense of hope, returned to the city, where she again sought out a reputable clinic and this time bravely agreed to the complex, life-saving surgery. Gabe, the house now truly his, stayed on, visiting Victoria almost every day, his quiet presence a comforting anchor. One crisp autumn afternoon, returning home from a supply run, he saw a group of local kids, their voices sharp and cruel, taunting a boy of about 8, clearly not from around here, most likely a runaway. Gabe, his heart clenching with a familiar ache of empathy, quickly dispersed the bullies. He took the small boy's trembling hand and led him back to the warmth and safety of his home. "Who are you, kid?" Gabe asked gently, his voice gruff but kind. "I haven't seen you around here before. Just passing through?" "I'm a wanderer," the boy replied, his voice small yet resolute. "I left the foster home. It's easier to survive out here in the quiet towns than in the city." "What is your name? What about your parents? Are you looking for them?" Gabe pressed, his gaze softening. "My name is Leo, and I'm not looking for anyone," the boy said, his eyes so like his mother's, holding an ancient sorrow. "My mum died. Someone hit her right in the crosswalk, and I never knew my dad." This last revelation struck Gabe like a physical blow, a bolt of lightning through his very soul. He began to question the child, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and discovered with a chilling certainty that it was all true. This was the son of the very woman whose death Gabe had been unjustly imprisoned for, the innocent life taken by the reckless driving of a privileged boy. Knowing this, Gabe understood with absolute clarity that he could not, would not, simply let this child go. "Listen, Leo," Gabe said softly to the wide-eyed boy, his voice laced with a gentle authority. "You can stay with me for now. I promise I won't let any harm come to you. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Gabe felt an immediate, profound pull to this child. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he had to adopt this boy, or at the very least, secure legal guardianship. But the path to achieving this was fraught with obstacles. First, he was unmarried, a significant hurdle in the eyes of family services. Second, his past, marked by an unjust conviction, painted him with a brush of unsuitability, a shadow he couldn't easily shake. There was only one clear path forward. He needed to wait for Victoria to be discharged from the hospital. Together, they could devise a strategy. But upon his next visit to the sterile, hushed corridors of the medical centre, a chilling realization struck him. Victoria was in a coma. The complex surgery had been performed and, initially, all reports indicated success. Yet, somewhere along the line, her consciousness had simply failed to return. "It's not an uncommon occurrence," her attending physician, a kind-faced woman with weary but empathetic eyes, explained gently to Gabe. "Sometimes, after general anaesthesia, patients don't immediately regain full awareness. But there's no need to panic. We're doing everything humanly possible to bring Victoria back to us, back to a normal life." Yet days bled into weeks, and Victoria remained in that suspended state, a silent, unmoving figure beneath the crisp hospital sheets. Gabe, a beacon of unwavering hope, continued his daily pilgrimages to her bedside. He would sit, holding her hand, sometimes for hours, talking to her in low, earnest tones. He spoke of Leo, of the boy's heartbreaking story, of the weight of their shared past. He explained with a raw vulnerability how desperately he needed her to return. "You'll help Leo and me, won't you, Victoria?" he'd whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "He's a good kid, and I know you'll adore him. We just need to create the illusion of a normal family for the adoption agency. And after that, we won't bother you, truly, not unless you want us to." He explained it all to the unmoving woman, clinging to the desperate hope that, in some distant corner of her mind, she could still hear him, still understand. Time, a relentless river, continued to flow. Victoria's condition didn't just fail to improve, it worsened. Her breaths grew shallower, more ragged, each one a fragile testament to her fading strength. The faint colour, that had returned to her cheeks after surgery receded, leaving her skin pale as moonlight. Her doctors, their faces grim, began to speak of irreversible decline, of the body's eventual surrender. They gently suggested to Gabe that perhaps it was time to prepare for the inevitable, to accept what they called the natural course of her illness. But Gabe couldn't accept it. Not yet. Not when Leo's small hand clung to his, whispering dreams of a real family. He came to Victoria's room, not just with Leo, but with a desperate, unwavering plea. He sat by her bed, taking her cold hand in his voice cracking with emotion. "Victoria," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "Please, you have to fight. I know you're tired, so tired, but please, come back to us. Leo needs a family. I need a family. We can't do this without you. You're our last hope. You're our miracle. Please, just open your eyes for us." He felt a tremor, faint but undeniable, in her hand. Her eyelids, heavy for so long, fluttered, then slowly, painstakingly opened. Her gaze, unfocused at first, slowly found theirs, and a weak, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "Gabe, Leo, I missed you both." Even the seasoned medical staff, accustomed to the vagaries of life and death, considered it nothing short of extraordinary. Victoria, after such a prolonged absence from consciousness, and with her recent decline, was not expected to survive, much less awaken. But she did. Her recovery was remarkably swift, a phoenix rising from the ashes of illness. Just a month later, Gabe was able to bring her home, not to the bustling city, but to the tranquil countryside house, now truly her sanctuary. It was here, in the quiet embrace of the rural landscape, that he and Leo could continue to help her, patiently awaiting the moment when she, fully recovered, could, in turn, help them. And fully recovered, she did become. Her vibrant spirit returned, her strength blooming anew. Victoria, her heart overflowing with a gratitude that transcended mere words, agreed to marry Gabe. "This isn't just about adopting Leo, you know," she said, a soft, knowing smile gracing her lips, her eyes twinkling with genuine affection. "You've truly become the closest person in my life, Gabe. My dearest love, my truest friend." And Gabe, tears of overwhelming joy blurring his vision, wrapped his beloved Victoria in a tender, protective embrace. A man who had found his own healing in helping others. After they signed the papers in a quiet, intimate ceremony, the question of Leo's adoption was settled remarkably quickly, smoothly, as if destiny itself was smoothing their path. And so they began their lives as a complete, loving family, their days filled with newfound joy and purpose.